We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot, season number 4, episode number 52. And welcome in, man. It's been a long, eventful week across the sporting landscape. Man, I hope you guys had a great week as we wind down, as we mosey on along into the weekend. Yeah, man, I know how hard those weeks can be out there busting it, trying to get that bread. Also, too, taking care of children if you do have them and other family members. But the great thing about sports is it's a diversion a little bit away from what we call, going through regular life trials and tribulations. And so, man, I'm definitely excited, man, to be here at the weekend, man, in this beautiful month of May. The things are heating up outside across the country. Also, two things are heating up across the sporting landscape. And first and foremost, man, if it's your first time listening, we on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. We provide high-fire takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. And if you're an OG of the show, man, I appreciate the check-in, man. So, this thing with the NBA playoffs is heating up as we have teams now. We got a Game 7 coming up over the weekend between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets. Man, was that exciting game last night, man, between OKC and Denver. Denver was able to hold serve in game number 6 out there at 52-80 out there in Denver. So, man, I love them game 7s, man. It's just going to be a war of attrition. Two, MVP guys. I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander more than likely is going to win the MVP award this season. You got the reigning MVP, Nikola Jokic. So, this is what the sport is all about, man. Two premier guys, two great teams, two situations to where, one for Denver, they've been in this situation before, obviously winning an NBA championship a couple years ago. And Oklahoma City, they're in that situation now where it's time for them to either step up and mature, or they're going to be gone fishing, man, with everybody else who's fell short across the NBA playoffs. Speaking of that as well, we got a hot one tonight between the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks. As now we travel to New York, Madison Square Garden, as the Knicks up 3-2. Man, we'll see if the Knicks can knock off the defending NBA champion Boston Celtics. Obviously, we had the situation with Jason Tatum and the Achilles injury, and this is the first time me speaking on it, man. Last time I checked in with you guys, man, it was before the Tatum injury, man. Just sad to hear, sad to see. I kind of knew what time it was, man. I was watching the game live and kind of knew what time it was when it happened. Yours truly, I actually blew out my Achilles, man, about 9 years ago. So, I've been down that road, hooping, being out, just trying to get back on the mend, man, get back to yourself. And a lot of people forget, man, it's a mental component with that whole situation, not only just the physical. And, you can tell when Jason, man, when he went down, man, he knew what time it was. But Boston is still alive out here, and they're one of the deepest teams in the NBA, man. We'll see what they're able to do. I'm going to get into that, obviously. And another guy who got injured, which, I'm going to get into as well, whose season is over. And that's Steph Curry, man, and the Golden State Warriors. They got dispatched by the Minnesota Timberwolves as the Timberwolves move on to their second consecutive Western Conference Finals. And, just sad to see Curry not be able to get back into participation in that series as the Timberwolves was able to close them out in 5 games. I'm going to get into that. I'm going to get into that whole situation. Also, we had the NBA draft lottery jump off. NBA draft lottery. And I'm old enough to remember when the NBA had the first draft lottery. And that was, way back in the time machine in 1985. I was about 7 years old. And, and the prize of that NBA draft was Patrick Ewing. And, in that draft, David Stern had just became, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association. The Knicks had went through kind of somewhat of a low period, even though my man Bernard King, man, Hall of Famer, was hooping back then. Shout out to my man Hubie Brown, who's the head coach of the Knicks, who just retired, man, from broadcasting. But a lot of people thought back then, with the whole frozen envelope, and for my youngins out there, you definitely can YouTube that whole situation. There was a lot of speculation, man, that the NBA rigged the NBA draft lottery, man, for the New York Knicks to be able to get the services of Patrick Ewing. At the time, Patrick Ewing was that guy, at Georgetown, had won a national championship, the year prior, lost a national championship to the great Villanova team, man. One of the greatest Final Four games I've ever seen. And a lot of people thought the fix was in. And, I was a kid and, I really wasn't into, conspiracy theories back then. But, looking back on it, man, in hindsight, it was a little janky, man. It was a little shady. And so the reason I mention all of that is that here we go again. As the Dallas Mavericks was able to get the number 1 pick, the Dallas Mavericks have been in the news for obvious reasons. They moved on from Luka Doncic, trading him to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis and, Max Christie. And a lot of people thought, basically it was another gift to the Los Angeles Lakers. There's a lot of speculation out there that it was Adam Silver just trying to keep the Lakers in the spotlight, and that, Dallas got the bad sign of the coin on that deal, especially too with, Kyrie Irving going out shortly after that trade, Anthony Davis being banged up. In Dallas, they had a puncher's chance to try to get into the playoffs. They lost, in the play-in, and look what just happened. As it looks like the Dallas Mavericks is more than likely going to take Cooper Flagg number 1 in the NBA draft. Cooper Flagg, Duke University, had an outstanding freshman year, won national, college basketball player of the year. And the funny part about it, if Cooper Flagg didn't reclassify, he actually will be going into college. He'll be a high school senior going and transitioning into college basketball. But with all of that said and done, this was a shot in the arm for the Dallas Mavericks. And all the talk with Nico Harrison, which to me, a lot of that was, rightfully so. I mean, when you trade a guy like Luka Doncic, who, got there, right on the tail end of the career of, Dirk Nowitzki, that's going to be big time news, man. And, he came out and had several press conferences, which to me didn't make no sense. At the end of the day, you made the move, dude. Stick by the move. Stand on business. And for Dallas to get this number 1 pick, it's looking like they're headed in the right direction. And this could be a team next season that definitely is going to be, a contender in the Western Conference, especially with the ancillary moves that Nico Harrison may make during the offseason. Dallas could be right back in the mix. And we'll see. Obviously, Kyrie Irving is coming back from the Achilles injury. Anthony Davis, he had a good season but got nicked up, ironically, when he got out to Dallas. So we'll see what they do. There's a lot of speculation out there that the Dallas Mavericks might be in the whole situation, which, word came back with Giannis Antetokounmpo wanting to potentially listen to other teams and potentially move out of Milwaukee, and Dallas could be a destination for him. And to me, I'll be honest, it's going to be tough to make that move. And the reason why it's going to be tough to make that move is just the whole salary cap situation with the NBA and the hard cap and just the the luxury tax implications and, just in all of that, things have changed. It's harder to go out here and put a big 3 together. It's not the, the Boston Celtics and the, the LeBron, Wade and Bosh Miami Heat, or what we just presently seen with the Phoenix Suns taking a crack at it and, crashing and burning on that. It's not easy to do that. It's just not easy to do that. And so, to me, I think it may be in Dallas' best interest to go ahead and, draft Cooper Flagg. To me, I'm not going to say I got mixed reviews on Cooper Flagg because I think he's an outstanding talent. I just think that, to me, we'll see if he's that generational talent. Because every couple years, the NBA try to put a stamp on a guy that's a generational talent. More notably, Wembanyama, which to me, he unfortunately went out with the blood clots this season. He could be that next guy that's a generational talent. I mean, just that big and being able to shoot and, being able to be a defender. I got no qualms with Wemby. But with Cooper Flagg, I'm not sure if he's in that same airspace. And I think that in the best interest, say, for the Dallas Mavericks, it may be just to go ahead and bring this guy into the fold. You already kind of have a veteran team. You got a good front court, probably one of the best front courts in the league, just as far as depth is concerned. And so Dallas, it was a huge shot in the arm for the Dallas Mavericks, man. So we'll definitely see what they do moving forward. I didn't see, just the whole situation with him potentially going to the Washington Wizards. I ain't see that happening. Meaning that there's no shade on Wizards fans out there. It's not, shade on the DMV or nothing like that. Don't get it twisted. It's just that The NBA, they always got a trick up their sleeve, and I just don't think that, especially in an American-born player, who's going to be drafted first overall, I just don't see him going to a situation like Washington. Now, I would have potentially liked for him to go to maybe Charlotte. Just a issue or a situation where it's kind of a small market team. They just trying to kind of get, one of those, major players is, right now they rocking out with Melo. So I wouldn't mind seeing something like that. But Dallas is a huge shot in the arm for them, man. So we'll definitely see, what Dallas has in store during this NBA offseason and so forth. So also, the National Football League is going to always be lurking out there, man. It's, word that just came across the desk. Looks like the San Francisco 49ers just got a huge deal with Brock Purdy done, a 5-year, $260 million deal with Brock Purdy. And that's going to be interesting because I think that the San Francisco 49ers is a team in transition. Obviously got C-Mac. He's not getting no younger. He was nicked up all season long. They got rid of a lot of, of their main guys, Deebo Samuel being one of them to come to mind. Last year they paid a nice little coin for Brandon Ayuk. He got hurt, soon after basically signing that deal. They made a lot of key moves on the defensive end to the NFL draft. So this team got a little cheaper and got a little younger, which was understandable because they knew, and John Lynch, the general manager out there, he knew what time it was. He knew, he had to pay, at this point, Brock Purdy at least what I consider market value for him. And so there's a lot of pressure on Brock Purdy this season because last year, when those guys was out due to injuries, he was just another guy. And I'm not trying to put any shade on Brock Purdy, but, he didn't show me that he was a top 5 guy, top 10 guy. And I think the position that the San Francisco 49ers is in right now, Kyle Shanahan is always head coach. He's always going to be cooking up and scheming up. But I just think at the end of the day, this is an organization that is not as talented as it was a couple years ago. So we'll see what the Niners do moving forward, man. But that was a huge move coming across the desk. Is that Brock Purdy just got broke off a nice little coin. We'll definitely see what that do. And also too, man, before I get into all my NBA breakdown and the playoff breakdown and so forth, coming up towards the end of the show, man, I'm gonna get into this whole Pete Rose thing, man. Pete Rose and Joe Jackson, man, from the Black Sox era, betting on baseball. These guys had the audacity to blow the World Series back in the 1920s. Shout out to my man Mako, just a huge White Sox fan. Man, so him and, Rose got reinstated. They both will be eligible upon voting to get into the Hall of Fame. So I'm definitely going to get into that and what Rob Manfred, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, got up his sleeve with that whole move. We'll definitely see what it do. But let's just talk about what occurred last night real quickly between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets. As this was a huge game 6, obviously it was an elimination game, from Denver's perspective. They were trying to push this thing to 7 games. And I knew going in, it was going to be tough sledding for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I'm not saying that from a perspective of, whether or not they're capable. It's just I thought that Denver, after they dropped Game 5, that they was going to be a little bit more motivated, because Game 5 was a game that could have been won. But they let it slip out of the cracks. And so, to me, Game 6 was really a situation about, just to me, experience more so of anything. And what I mean by that is that Denver came out hot in this game. They came out looking like they was, just on business. Then the game kind of slowed down a little bit in the second quarter, just a little bit, as it kind of just came to a screeching halt from the offensive standpoint of the Denver Nuggets. And that's when my man Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just got to cooking. I mean, straight cooking. They went on a run, got a couple transition baskets. Chet Holmgren was putting in work, caught a oop, getting it in. And I'm like, oh man, maybe, just maybe, they gonna give Denver the knockout blow at the crib. But I ain't gonna front. Denver, they got back on their swag again. And to me, the Denver Nuggets is really about 3 guys. Michael Porter Jr., you got, obviously Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon. Now, Aaron Gordon, he been wearing the Superman cape for them, man, so far this season, man. Can't fault him. He's been playing some outstanding ball, playing with some great confidence. Murray, last night, man, he played with a little bit more effort than I seen him, play over the last maybe 2 games or so. And Michael Porter Jr. Because Jokic going to get his. Everybody know that. Jokic going to get his. I had 29 points, 14 rebounds, and 8 assists. Fresh off another 40-20 game. So I'm not worried about the Joker, but I am worried about, say, the others for Denver. And shout out to my man Strawder. Strawder came off the bench, and to me, he was the reason they won the game. Just with the energy that youngin brought, man, hitting those big threes, hitting those big game time shots. And that's what it's about, the NBA playoffs, man. It's really about the others. It's obviously, Denver was able to win this game 119-107. Shea, as I mentioned, he had a pretty good game, 32 points and 6 assists for him. But, yeah, those 3 guys for Denver, they going to be the litmus test, man, for the Denver Nuggets, man. If they trying to get out of this, second round and get themselves back to the Western Conference Finals, we'll definitely see what that do. But I can't wait for this Game 7. And also, too, can't wait for this game tonight. This game between the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks, as the Knicks up 3-2. And just got off not too long ago, man, off the horn with my man Isalim with the Weekly Dog Sports Betting Podcast. He's a little bit down, obviously, about, his Golden State Warriors, his transplant team, his Golden State Warriors, getting eliminated. But we also, too, had a nice little brief discussion about the game tonight between the Knicks and the Celtics. And he asked me straight out, man, who I got tonight. And the first thing I told E was, and I'll share with you guys, was, I don't know. Because I think that the Knicks, I think it'll be huge for them playing the Madison Square Garden. MSG is going to be on one. But the Boston Celtics are defending NBA champions. And what they say, never, test the heart of a champion. Shout out to my man Rudy Tomjanovich back in the mid-90s. So I don't know. But I'm going to go out on a limb here. Because we've been hit or miss so far in these playoffs, man. It's been very, very unpredictable. But I think the New York Knicks, I think they win this game. And I think this game will be decided in the fourth quarter. I just think that the crowd from MSG just going to be a little bit too much for the Boston Celtics, especially if this game is close. I just think that Jalen Brunson is just going to make enough plays. It's already gotten a little chippy, as we saw that in last game. Obviously with JB, Jaylen Brown, man, and just that whole situation with him and Hart. But I think the guy that's going to help lead the New York Knicks to victory tonight is going to be Karl-Anthony Towns. To me, he's the swing guy in this whole series. If he's a passive guy in this game, then I may lean towards the Boston Celtics. But I got the Knicks tonight, man. I think this thing is going to be close. I think it's going to come down to the fourth quarter or so, man. And I think Jalen Brunson is going to be that guy again, man, and put on a Superman cape and get the Boston Celtics up out of here, man, and the Knicks will move on to the Eastern Conference Finals. It's been a long time, and some of y'all weren't even born last time, man. The Knicks made the Eastern Conference Finals, so we'll see what it do, man. But coming up, now I'm gonna definitely get into the rest of the playoff slate, man, as we take a look across the sporting landscape. Once again, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spots. Welcome back. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of these NBA playoffs, man, because it's real money time out here, man. We got teams on the doorstep of the conference finals as the Final Four is about to be set in the NBA playoffs, man. And there's a lot of legacy changing things that happen, say, within the playoffs. Meaning that, you can have, say, either a player or a team that you might have been sleeping on, man, and the team make a run and it changes just your whole opinion about this team or about this player. We've seen it just over the years where just some of the others or the role players, even step up and etch their name into the NBA lexicon as far as just being big time, say, performers. And this is that time of the year that this really jumps off. Like I said, whether it be a superstar player, whether it be, just the role guys, whether it be a team as a collective, whether it be a coach that steps his game up, during this time of the year. To me, this is exciting because it separates really the man from the boys at this point in junction of the NBA season, man. And so you gotta love it. And can't forget about what happened a couple days ago. I know it's been a minute since I hit you guys up, man, but we definitely got to get into a team that fit right in that box and a player that fit right in that box. And that's the Indiana Pacers, man. As the Pacers, they was able to knock off the Cleveland Cavaliers in 5 games as they move on back to the Eastern Conference Finals for the second consecutive year. And I remember a few years back when we seen Rick Carlisle, at that time, Rick Carlisle was the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks at that time. And, he had Luka Doncic, just a budding international superstar at that time, ready to spread his wings and just really be that guy out here. And we seen Rick Carlisle say, no, I'm good. And he moved on to the Indiana Pacers. And there was a lot of people at that point in time that thought Rick Carlisle was crazy. Meaning that, you leave at the time owner Mark Cuban and you leave Luka Doncic and you go to Middle America for a team that, no shade on the state of Indiana, man. Because, I'm from the neighboring state, Illinois. Indiana loves its basketball. They love their basketball from the high school level to the collegiate level, and they love them Pacers, man, up there in Indianapolis and all across the state of Indiana. But it was interesting to me to see Rick make that move, and I made a mental note because that mental note was something's awry in Dallas. And a lot of people didn't think that, him going to the Pacers was really a step backwards. But, this team, as I mentioned, they knocked off the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that had the number 1 seed in the East the whole season, pretty much winning, close to, 65 games during the regular season. And you had, the reigning coach of the year, Kenny Atkinson, which Kenny Atkinson did a great job with this ball club during the regular year. Obviously he replaced, Bickerstaff as the head coach up in Cleveland. And there was a lot of talk about Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and, just that whole crew being able to gel and take that next step. And through the regular season, we saw that. And, this is a team that, just like most of you guys, I easily predicted that Cleveland and Boston will meet up in the Eastern Conference Finals. I thought it was going to be inevitable. But boy, was I wrong. On that one. And another, person just in that equation was Tyrese Halliburton. He's a guy that, obviously I know you guys have probably heard the polls as far as the most overrated players in the NBA. And Halliburton was on that list. Now, I'm not sure, and it was from the players, obviously, so a lot of times just some jealousy soaked in there. Halliburton was fresh off his Olympic run. He didn't get a lot of burn during the Olympics, but this is the best team in the world when you put an Olympic team together. So to me, it's really no shade. I mean, he still get a gold medal. Congratulations to him on that. And I didn't feel like he was overrated, to be honest with you. I thought that this regular season, there was ebbs and flow through the season where, he wasn't playing his best basketball. Part of that, he was a little nicked up. And I think that right now you're seeing a fully healthy version of this guy. You're seeing the most confident that he's ever been. And this dude has been clutch. I mean, let's keep it 100. Cleveland, they dropped, a couple games in this series that easily could have been won by the Cavaliers. And part of that is on Kenny Atkinson. As I said, a couple, episodes ago, is that just that whole situation, man, where, Donovan Mitchell basically put the team on his back. And you guys just failed to, hold the lead down with a minute left in the game. That's all on coaching. You got the wrong guys in the game. You don't have an inbound or a ball handler other than Donovan Mitchell. And it came back to burn the Cleveland Cavaliers. And in the playoffs, you can't give up a game to a team. A game will swing the whole series. And you saw the Indiana Pacers take advantage of that. Tyrese Halliburton, his confidence is growing every single game. And it's really about the others, too. Guys like Pascal Siakam. This is a former NBA champion. Guys like Miles Turner, Nembhard playing good ball. Benedict Mathurin being just grimy out there, man. And so I'm liking what I'm seeing from the Indiana Pacers. As I mentioned, man, they two-step their way into the Eastern Conference Finals. They obviously await the winner of the Boston Celtics in the Knicks series. And, we'll see what that thing do, man, coming up a little later on tonight as we got game number 6 as Boston was able to, hold the fort down in game number 5. Obviously, I mentioned a little bit earlier with Jason Tatum and just the ramifications of just that injury and so forth and what it will mean for Boston, say, moving forward. But man, a lot of times, it's really about the heart and determination. And a lot of these series is hard to predict on paper. And I think that's what the NBA wants. Meaning that obviously you want to have your quote-unquote legacy teams or quote-unquote super teams or teams that can kind of move the needle a little bit. But it's always good, man, to have that team go out there and play with the spirit of the game. Meaning that they don't care if they're a favorite. They don't care if they're an underdog. they're going to go out there and try to get a W on you. And the Pacers is, a perfect example of that. So we'll definitely, see what that thing do, man, moving forward for the Pacers as they play a little waiting game, waiting on that Boston and New York Knicks series to conclude. So we'll definitely see what that thing do, moving forward as well. Also, another team that season is over, and that's the Golden State Warriors. And the Golden State Warriors, easy thing would say that, hey, when Steph Curry went out of the series, this series was over. And you listening to a guy that believed that. I knew once Steph Curry went out of the series, it was over. Meaning that the Warriors, they had a nice little run. But the thing about the playoffs is that teams sometimes revert back to what they were in the regular season. And before the Jimmy Butler trade, this Golden State Warriors team really wasn't cracking like that. And, Jimmy was able to get them, a boost of energy. And I think that they kind of played that out during the end of the regular season. They got a favorable matchup in the Houston Rockets, who was the second seed in the West. But they're a young ball club, and they're still learning. And I thought that was a great matchup, say, for them. But when you're talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, this is a team now that has experience. This is their second forte going to the Western Conference Finals, 2 consecutive seasons, just like the Indiana Pacers. And we're seeing a changing of the guard in the league. Meaning that, as much as I love Steph Curry, I mean, he's the greatest shooter, God ever invented. But he's 37 years old. And, at some point, your body break down a little bit. I think that they may be in a transition period in Golden State. We heard the statement that Steph Curry made during kind of the mid part of the season, that he wouldn't be mad if the organization kind of took a step back a little bit to try to get this team younger. And I think that this was their home run play. Now, the cool part about it, you did re-sign Jimmy Butler when he came over from the Miami Heat. But at the end of the day, Mike Dunleavy Jr., who's the general manager of the Golden State Warriors, he got his hands full this summer. And he's really got to make a decision. And I think Jimmy Butler kind of helped him with that, is that, hey, you still got to give, Steph Curry the opportunity to try to win another NBA championship. But these young guys in the West is not making it no easier. And Ant-Man, just being that guy, man. And to me, the unsung hero, man, for the Minnesota Timberwolves is Julius Randle. This guy got traded for Karl Anthony Towns during the offseason. There was a lot of people saying that Karl Anthony Towns was, the Knicks got the better of the deal. And I was standing on business saying that I think Minnesota got the better of the deal. And here's why. Because Julius Randle know who he is. He know his game. He know his game is predicated on trying to get downhill. Obviously he'll hit a jumper for you, hit a three for you. But he know his game is banging and getting downhill. And that's something that the Golden State Warriors, they wasn't ready for. They just not equipped to deal with a guy like that. And, in combination with him, Anthony Edwards, and Rudy Gobert, just too much talent on the court, man, for the Golden State Warriors to bear. And as I mentioned, they're going to have brighter days, man. But once Steph went out in that series, I knew it was over in that series, man. As I mentioned, Steph Curry is a huge loss for any team. But this Golden State Warriors team in particular, especially with Jimmy Butler, he's not a spring chicken either. Now, I expected Jimmy to have a couple good games, with Steph being out. But Jimmy is not, super scored like that. And so you're going to have, for every 30-point game he had, like you had the other night, you're going to come back and you're going to get a 19-point game out of Jimmy Butler. And to me, that's just not enough offensive output to be able to quell a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves, man. And so congratulations to Chris Finch. To me, he's an underrated coach. There was a lot of heat on this team earlier in the season when they didn't jump out the box, being that team that made the Western Conference Finals last season. But they was able to build that chemistry over the year. And look at them now, man. They back in the Western Conference Finals as they await the winner of Oklahoma City and the Denver Nuggets. So we'll definitely see what that do. Obviously we'll preview, that series in the Western Conference Finals as well as the Eastern Conference Finals, once, the semifinals conclude. So we'll definitely see what that do. Once again, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. Man, before I get out of here, man, there's one thing that I definitely want to speak upon, man, and just, put a little sauce to it, man, is that Major League Baseball, man. We had Rob Manfred, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, come out the other day, man, and reinstate, Shoeless Joe Jackson, man, of the whole Black Sox scandal way back in the 1920s of the Chicago White Sox. Basically conspired to throw the World Series back in the 1920s, and also to reinstate Mr. Pete Rose. Now, Charlie Hustle, man, is definitely one of my top 10 favorite baseball players of all time. I got a chance to watch the tail end of his career, before he moved on to be the player manager of the Cincinnati Reds, man, back in the late 80s. And obviously, those who know, just the game of baseball know that, Pete got in trouble betting on baseball. Got, banned from the sport, back in, I believe, 1989, got banned from the sport. And also, too, came out and came clean, man, back in 2003. Saying that he bet on baseball, and obviously, passed away, a few months back. And just to see what Rob Manfred did, man, just reinstating Pete Rose. Now, I'll say this, because there's been a lot of opinions on this from just some of the baseball traditionalists out there. Shout out to my man Tim Kirchin and so forth, man, and just some of, my baseball guys that I kind of lean on, because I'm a lover of baseball, man, and, y'all know how I get down. And so it's a situation for me is that I don't mind Rob Manfred doing this. I just thought, and Pete even said this, man, before his death. He knew that potentially he'll get in the Hall of Fame when he gone. He knew that it wasn't going to happen when he was alive. And then, boy, was he right on that. Now, this thing still has to go to a vote. Now, with Shoeless Joe Jackson, I'm just going to say this. Obviously, that was many moons ago, man. We talking about, over 100 plus years ago, almost, basically. And, I'm from the city of Chicago, and that's a scandal that, I've been knowing about, since a kid, man. But for a guy to be part of a scandal to actually throw not just the game, what Allen Iverson say, not the game that I love, but actually the World Series, you never should get in the Hall of Fame. I mean, you're going to throw the biggest, basically, sporting event, the biggest game that, your sport has to offer, the biggest series your sport's got to have to offer. Nah, man, I'm not letting you in play on that. That's just too much. Now, with Pete, I'm not saying Pete was a saint or nothing like that, but at the end of the day, man, one, Pete, bet on his team basically to wins from what I'm hearing. Number two is the guy finally did come clean after years of lying, man. And like I said, they got some of his memorabilia, jerseys, balls, bats, and all of that. Obviously, he's the all-time hit king. They got, all his stuff in Cooperstown, man, in the Hall of Fame. And to me, I thought it was a classy move by the Cincinnati Reds, man, to throw Pete Rose Day. I mean, he's from, Cincinnati, man, so I thought that was real classy. But, for Manfred to do this kind of now with baseball obviously being basically about fifth on the sporting lexicon, I just thought it was a PR play. But, we'll see what it do, man. At the end of the day, I think that it's, right for the Rose family, man, to be able to celebrate him if he does get voted into the Hall of Fame. So I definitely something I want to speak on, man, just being a love of the game of baseball, and, man, Charlie Hustle being one of my favorite baseball players, man, back in the day. So, man, first and foremost, man, I appreciate you guys rocking out with me, man. Also, too, for your first time listening, I definitely appreciate you checking me out. Man, we consistent out here on these streets, dropping 2 to 3 shows a week. All on YouTube and We On 5 Sports. Also, too, on Twitter at We On 5 Sports. Also, too, you can catch us out with podcasts can be listened to on Podbean and all of the podcast houses out here, man. First and foremost, man, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll be right back at you at the top of the week. I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We On 5 Sports Podcast. The spot.